to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, June the 23rd in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes this program happen every week. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show, so we'll start off. And Walt, you have to say it's been another crazy week in the world. I want to start off with this headline in the Globe and Mail today. Yeah. Can you just read the...
South Carolina's governor remove the Confederate flag.
Yeah. So this story of the kind of crazy murder of many people at a church happened on almost the same day as the Pope's encyclical. And I noticed that a week later, the Pope story is basically gone from the media, and they've decided to focus on, I mean, the story of the people who were involved in that, you know, I mean, they're great and wonderful people. But I noticed that the story of the Pope's encyclical, in which he said that we're killing the earth and we have to reduce our consumption and we have to treat the earth better and we have to change the way we're living, that story's gone. And that's because they don't want to talk about that story. And that's one of the ways the media operates. They always find something else, and very often it's crime and murder, to cover up other stories. And really, what the Pope said is vitally important, because we are destroying the planet, and we've got to change our ways. And the corporate media just will not say that. It's kind of an amazing situation.
And time again it seems to have happened when you have a sensational story like this that overshadows other news of any importance,
Yeah.
sometimes for months.
You know, the story of the two men that escaped from the prison in New York, that's gotten more coverage than, I mean, every detail of that, they're all over it. But there's no details of, or very few details of what we've got to do immediately to change, to save our own lives.
Right, and you know, it goes a long ways back. You remember, I think it was 1993, when you told me, Jack, when the O.J. Simpson trials were going on.
God, yeah.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And at the same time, there was other much more important trials going on in New York for the bombers, the first bombers of the World Trade Center.
Yes.
And these people were testifying that they were working on behalf of the FBI or the CIA. I can't remember one or the other. And that testimony never saw the light of day. Yeah. Meanwhile, we studied O.J. pulling on leather gloves for days on end, and they dragged the story out and dragged the story out. Yeah. Yeah. And he was acquitted, wasn't he, in the end? He
was acquitted, but never by the media.
No.
He was acquitted by the jury unanimously, but in the eyes of the media, he had to be guilty. And you're absolutely right, the story of the first bombing of the World Trade Center, in which a number of people were killed, it was with a car bomb in the parking garage underneath. Right. And they always said that the whole thing was an FBI setup. You know, they were almost like patsies, the guys who were arrested.
Yeah, and they were testifying to that in court.
Yeah, never mentioned.
While the O.J. thing was going on. That really sensitized me to that idea that whenever something really big is happening, it seems that another event occurs, whether the elites had orchestrated it or just want to play it up, one way or the other. We're going to hear ends and ends of days all about some trivia about some story that really isn't that important.
Yeah, like for example, the escape of those two men from a New York prison. Really, it's gotten more coverage in our media than the entire story of the Pope and so many others. I mean, it's like every day now the environmental crisis grows, and not only the environmental crisis, like the economic crisis that's about to befall us is also going to be disastrous. there was something in the Senate that again just focuses this same attention on how the media operates. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of coverage in the Canadian media about the scandal in the Senate, and people over-expensing and all that, and they found like $1 million worth of stuff, and it cost $23 million audit to find the $1 million that had been. But what they never, at exactly the same time, the stories that are not covered were that the Senate passed Bill C-51, setting up Harper's secret police force that will basically be there to protect the oil companies and everybody else from the citizens of Canada. So Bill C-51 was passed by the Senate in complete secrecy. Why did they focus so much attention in the media on the scandal when the real scandal was the fact that this bunch of crooks passed Bill C-51? And at the same time, they also passed, which was also very important, Michael Chong's parliamentary reform bill, which really got watered down, but it's a very important bill that will help democratize our parliament, and nothing is more important than that. And yet that bill also just passed, I think, yesterday, but not hardly a word in the media anywhere.
Yeah, and it goes on and on. I mean, it sort of falls right into the, what's happening right now in BC with the healthcare worker firings.
Yes.
And this story is all over the media right now. And I think you mentioned that perhaps there's another story that they're hiding here also.
It's funny, when all of a sudden the NDP and the media all started calling for a public inquiry into the health care, and there should be a public inquiry, that's for sure. There should have been one years ago. But it just triggered in my mind something I'd read about something that Christy Clark was going to do this summer. So I thought, well, I'll just look into that, and I did. And so here's the story. It was just announced today that on July 13th, the provincial legislature is going to meet, and they're going to pass a law that will ratify a project development agreement, a PDA, between the government of BC and Petronas, which is Petronas, as everybody calls it, which is the big LNG poisoner of our province. I mean, this is going to involve a massive poisoning of our province. So they've made the deal. The PDA has been signed. Now the government has to pass it. So they're calling the House into session in July, I think on July 13th. I phoned the NDP. They said this could pass in as little as 1 week. It'll be introduced, it'll get 3 readings and pass. Maybe it'll take 2 weeks. The NDP hasn't said they're going to oppose it, because the NDP also supports fracking and LNG, the whole disastrous thing. So what is the agreement that's going to be made? We don't know, because they won't show us the PDA. The project development agreement that is going to be passed remains secret. But there was an editorial in the Times Colonist about it, and these are a few of the things they say. Christy Clark, in the PDA, Christy Clark made a concession that no BC government has ever granted. She indemnified the company against any increase in taxes or royalties until 2038, the end of the agreement. So that means if a future government raises royalties, the company would be entitled to compensation in the amount of the increase. Normally, governments do not bind the hands of their successors. It's understood that whatever tax rates one administration imposes, another may change. That's just the way it is. But this agreement has the effect of a legally binding contract, meaning it would be difficult, if not impossible, to set aside. It's a measure of how radical this deal is that special legislation is required to put it in place. So this is going to happen on July 13th. There's nothing in the media about it. The NDP isn't exactly screaming about it. And the Times columnist also raises the issue that there are many, many companies operating in the LNG industry, and will they all get the same deal? Because you can't give one company a special deal, or possibly you can't. So I don't understand how these things, I mean, it almost boggles the mind.
Well, you know, and I always kind of joke about the Liberal NDP coalition government, but, you know, I'm not really joking, because this is a case where there really isn't any opposition on a really serious environmental and economic issue that will affect generations to come. And the sad thing is the tax rate that they're going to be charging. We're not sure what it is. I think it's 3%.
Who knows? That's
That
it.
was
We
mentioned
don't
a few
even
months
know.
ago.
Yeah.
3%. Now the thing is that we're going to be spending, the province and us taxpayers will be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on infrastructure to facilitate, you know, the industry, and we're collecting 3% taxes. It's almost unheard of. It's so ridiculously low. We're not only giving it all away, we're destroying our own environment, destroying our own economies at the same time. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, fracking is massively poisonous to the land, everything on the land and the water. It requires huge amounts of fresh water to do, which everybody says everybody's short of fresh water, and yet here is Christy Clark and the NDP. They all supported the destruction of our environment at an unprecedented rate. What's wrong with them? And going back to the story of the Pope, I mean, it's this whole climate change thing, and beyond that, the destruction of the earth. And here in BC, it's like our leadership can't destroy it fast enough.
well, it's no mystery if you think about who, you know, who did they work for in their previous lives before they were elected. And, you know, Christy Clark was a lobbyist for Enbridge pipelines, and so was
Well,
her,
wait a second, maybe.
maybe.
Her husband was.
Oh, yeah.
Former husband, yeah. She was close, but
The thing is that you know, they're obviously looking out after the corporate elites. You can't spin this around any other way. It's what they're doing. They're trying to spin it for us to try to believe that it's going to be something good for British Columbia, but there's no evidence to support that. And here we have the NDP. Look, you know, what are they doing? Do they really think it's such a great idea too? How could they think it's such a great idea? Like, who are the wizards and the gurus in the NDP that would look at the LNG and any objective measurement, economic or environmental issues, social issues, development issues? There's no plus side to this. It's just a long, sad, many decades of pollution and degradation.
so let's move ahead in a positive way. Let's create industry that is not destructive. I mean, why do we want to create an industry that's poisoning the province, and especially our water? Why do we want to do that? And yet, can't we do anything better? It's bizarre.
Well, somebody's going to make some money, Jack. That's all I can say.
Yes, right. So, about this bill, I mean, the thing about it is they're going to pass it right here in Victoria.
Yeah.
All of our democratic legislators, our elected representatives, are going to be here in Victoria on July 13th for a week or two or maybe 3 that it takes them to get this bill through, right in our midst. So let's see if somehow we, the people of Victoria, who I think a lot of us don't want our planet destroyed by these lunatics, they're going to be in our midst, they're going to be in our legislature. Maybe we can do something to really make this an issue, really stand up to these undemocratic fascists and try to slow them down. They're doing it around the world, and it's up to us too. Do you have any topics?
Well, I think you covered the ones that I was interested in.
Residential schools? Yeah. I just want to say that the government and the churches who played a big part in this deserve all the negative things that are falling upon them for doing this. But I think we really have to ask, as we always do, where was the media in that story? Because I grew up in those years and we were never told. And it's that same old thing. The media knew about the residential schools probably from day one. In fact, they were probably in on the planning of it. But they never told the people of Canada. They allowed it to happen, just as they're going to allow, just as they allow the genetic contamination of our food supply, the destruction of the environment, the changing of our economy into one that works for the rich and the poor or homeless. The media knows, and they knew about the residential schools, and they kept it quiet. And the media should be apologizing. The governments have apologized, the churches have apologized. The media should apologize, and even more so, corporate Canada should apologize, because a big reason for the residential schools and the attempted destruction of the First Nations people was to clear them out of the way for the logging companies, the mining companies, Alcan. I've heard stories about Alcan that are just horrendous.
Well, I think, going right back to when Columbus first set foot on North America, the first person to jump off the bow of the ship was a priest. They always brought the priests with them to educate the natives and to convert them to Catholicism or whatever religion. But the thing is that is a process of cultural destruction from the very start. And it all fits very well into the colonialist, model. And if there are people on the land that you want, you have to disenfranchise them. This is what they did in South Africa with apartheid, and what Israel is doing with the Palestinians. They looked at the Canadian model of residential schools and reserves and used those models and the laws to set up apartheid and to set up the system in Israel. So, we got something to be proud of, I guess. We had this model that worked. The thing is, we shouldn't be too surprised about it. And, now that, time has gone by and First Nations people are asserting their rights, they're gaining some ground back. I'm just hoping that they do not get bought out by the oil companies and bought out by corporate interests, especially with the pipelines that now offering that all these First Nations people are going to be involved and be employed and stuff like that. And it seems to me that that's just another process of disenfranchising them, because once they give up those rights, they're never going to get them back again.
No. Really good luck to us all. I was listening to CFAX today, and one of the hosts, they had a guest on there talking about one thing, but he just had to bring in something about vaccinations and how those of us who don't want the corporations to vaccinate us when they are like, we're a big problem in this society, we anti-vaxxers. And I read a story written by Robert Kennedy Jr. It was in Rolling Stone. I think it was published in 2005, and I just looked it up again. Do you remember that story at all? Yeah. Robert Kennedy took a lot of flack from the corporate media for this, but basically it was this. There was a secret meeting held a few years before, and somebody sent Kennedy the papers. The meeting was behind all the big vaccine companies and the Center for Disease Control, because they were really concerned that their research was showing that the thimerosal, the mercury-based preservative they were putting into the vaccines, was really injuring children. So the meeting was, according to Kennedy, to make sure that the public never found out about this. And that's what Kennedy's story was, how they completely covered this over. And then they did take the mercury out of most, if not all, children's vaccines. God knows what they put in. They still use it in flu vaccines, and they still use it in vaccines to which adults get. But, the vaccine industry, the drug companies, they certainly don't care about our health. So we should be very careful of media telling us that vaccines are safe and effective and they have to be done.
And if they disclose absolutely everything that's in the vaccine, we might have a better chance to assess whether we're in favor of it. Right now, they don't have to do that.
Yeah, and if vaccines are safe and effective, hey, I'll be first in line. But I no longer believe they are. Let's finish off with Saanich. I don't know if you know what is going on there these days with the spyware thing, but...
Well, the media's spinning it today a bit more. There was an inquiry. Richard Atwell was asking for an inquiry. I think they've turned that idea down. Saying that the chief of police was in some type of conflict
Oh,
of
yeah,
interest.
that was a bit of a separate issue.
That
from
was
the
a side
spyware,
story.
Yeah. But to me, the most amazing thing about the spyware thing is that it's been months now since it happened, and nothing is happening. It's just being swept under the rug.
They don't know what to do, Jack. They're guilty.
Yeah, they're guilty.
The Saanich Council are guilty. They did it. Their only
allowed it,
defense
yeah.
is were they ignorant of the law, or were they disdainful? Did they plan to do this, or were they just really that stupid?
And the staff, even more so, who fed this council
That's right.
misinformation, and yet the council doesn't seem to care.
No, to a certain degree, but there's a cabal in the Saanich Council. I can't tell if they're Liberal or NDPers. You know, they all act the same to me. They were trying to ram that one big sewage treatment plant I did down our throats.
Yeah.
They had 5 people on the CRD, and with the Victoria Council, they pretty well ran it. And they get caught with a terrible idea. And the public now knows how awful that idea was, and they have to try to live that down. And that's all tied into, of course, Richard Atwell being elected mayor and proposing a much better idea.
Walter, we're out of time.
Always a pleasure,
Thank you
Jack.
very much. And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, June the 23rd in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. Our guest in this segment is Torrance Coste. Torrance is with the Western Canada Wilderness Committee, often known as WC Squared, and we're going to be talking about what's happening right now in a very famous place around Victoria, which is the Walburn Valley. So maybe you can just tell us where it is in relation to Victoria and what's going on.
Yeah, so the Walburn Valley is on southwestern Vancouver Island. It's between Port Renfrew and Nitnat Lake. There's a series of valleys which have traditionally hosted some of the most spectacular old growth forests in the entire country, really. This is an area that was partially protected in the early 90s after really fierce public pressure campaigns, along with the entire neighboring valley, which is called the Carmanah the Carmanah Valley. So the Carmanah and Walbrand valleys are partially protected, and the unprotected part of the Walbrand Valley is really what we're concerned with now. Since the early 90s, logging has continued at a really unsustainable rate, and we've now got less than 10% of the original forest at low elevation left on Vancouver Island. Logging company by the name of Teal Jones is targeting one of the last pockets of standing old growth, which is in the Walbrand Valley. And that's what we're really trying to draw attention to right now, and pressure the provincial government to step up and find a solution that keeps these trees standing.
So what's the solution? Because I mean, to me, to still be cutting down old growth forest, especially such prime, I mean, there's almost none of it left on the planet anymore. Mm-hmm. It's totally crazy. Right. But what's the plan?
So in terms of forest policy, our 2 big asks are a ban on raw log exports, and B, a moratorium on old growth logging. So you're absolutely right. We just haven't got enough old growth left to log, and the province essentially has no plan to address that. They don't have a plan to protect what remains of our old growth. But the absence of such a plan can't mean that the last patches like the Walbrand are liquidated for private profit, which is exactly what Teal Jones is planning to do. So while we continue to call for a plan on old growth, a plan that sees the remaining pockets of old growth conserved in a way that works for First Nations who have always had access to these resources. That's sort of ongoing work for us at the Wilderness Committee, but also we need to lock off little pockets like the Central Walbran. So we're really pressuring the provincial government right now to come to the table with the logging company, because the thing is, the area that we're asking to be set aside in the Walbran is 486 hectares. It's between the Walbran River, the main stem of the Walbran River, and the existing park boundary. It's this last little sliver of unprotected forest. And 486 hectares sounds like a lot, but the entire tree farm license, which is the name of the forest tenure that this company has, is close to 100,000 hectares. So the area that we're asking them to stay out of is less than 0.5% of the land they have access to. This isn't a big radical ask. And the province, again, it's their role to come up and show leadership on that. So that's what we're asking them to do.
I assume the company will not relinquish it. Which company is it?
The company is called Teal Jones. They're based out of Surrey.
They own a, because I haven't been.
So it's called a TFL, or tree farm license. So it's crown land or public land.
Teal Jones has control of that tree farm license.
That's right. So they have the license. It's called Tree Farm License 46. It's an extensive 100,000 hectare.
And it just seems to move from one company to another.
That's right. So in the early 90s, it was a company called Fletcher Challenge. Now it's moved to Teal Jones. And when we last fall, October, late September, we found new flagging tape in the area. Flagging tape usually indicates exploration and the formation of new cut blocks. So we contacted the company. This is something that I always do with logging companies on Vancouver Island. This case was a little bit unique in that the company actually got back to me. Dealing with other companies, the infamous island timberlands further north on Vancouver Island, they'll either say consult with your government or no answer at all. Teal Jones did get back to me. They said they really cared about sustainability. They said they wanted to take environmental, recreational concerns to heart in this area. And we entered essentially a 6-month dialogue, where I was pointing out the benefits of old growth, the importance of these ecosystems. They, provide resources for First Nations that second growth forests just don't. They provide habitat for critically endangered species that second growth forests just don't. They sequester far more climate changing carbon than second growth forests, than younger forests. So in the age where, in this era where climate change is the #1 issue facing us, we don't have tar sands to leave in the ground on southwestern Vancouver Island. Our role, the way we can show climate leadership, is to leave old growth forest standing. I pointed all this out to them, and I sent them a map of the area that our mappers at Wilderness Committee put together, and it laid out this 486 hectare zone, which is the area, the absolute minimum area that we're calling for conservation, to protect the ecological integrity and the recreational values in this part of the Walbran Valley. They then, just a few weeks ago, sent me back a map that laid out their preliminary plans, and what their plans are 8 cut blocks, all within our no-go area, all within the most sensitive part of the Walbran Valley. So they essentially took all my concerns, all the things I was asking, and threw it all back in my face. So that was, a tough pill to swallow, and it's unfortunate. I had higher hopes for this company. I thought that environmental leadership really meant something to them, but again, they've proven that it hasn't. I've walked through fields of 1,000-year-old stumps that this company's created. That's their business model. So again, it's up to the province now to come to the table and put a stop to this.
Well, it's not only up to the province, it's up to the media to come to the table too, because it's like I listen to CFAX, I read the TC, I read the Globe and Mail, I try to watch the national news on CTV or CBC once a day just to see the story that they're feeding us. And this isn't big news, but it should be big news.
Yeah. So it got a little bit of attention. We took the company's logging plans and went public with them. It did receive a little bit of attention, but nothing to the scale, nothing that matches the urgency of this situation. With less than 10% of intact, low elevation rainforest remaining on Vancouver Island, this is a crisis. The old growth situation on this coast is an absolute crisis, and the province isn't treating it like that, and unfortunately the media is not, for the most part, recognizing that either. Absolutely, there's other concerns facing the island. You know, the situation, the straits that that the wild Pacific salmon are in.
But it's all the same issue.
It is, of course, all the
It's the
same
corporate
issue.
destruction
That's
of the entire planet. So here
That's
we
right.
have a chance to save something. And not only the corporate destruction, the corporate government destruction of the
Right.
entire planet.
And that's why, I mean, organizations like ours, we try to work on as many of these issues as we can. You know, we speak in opposition to a lot of things, but we also speak in favor to other things, you know, relocalizing our economy, getting more value for the resources that we do have. Because still, even though the majority of resources, be it timber, be it salmon, have been plundered, we're still relatively resource wealthy in comparison to other parts of the world. But we're not acting like there is any end in sight, even though it's very clear that there is. We're not acting like there's a climate crisis, even though it's very clear that there is. So advocating for solutions to these problems is part of the role of organizations like ours, as well as opposing projects that are just absolutely short-sighted, that serve no public interest, and threaten the environment, be it old-growth logging, be it LNG, be it tar sands pipelines.
So when does this company and Christy Clark plan to start logging in the Walburn Valley?
So that's another thing that we're scrambling to get our heads around. So the company, again, they sent us their preliminary plans before they went and applied for these permits. So to date, I just checked this afternoon, they haven't yet made an application. We're trying to turn this into a big issue for them and for the province before they do submit those applications. Once they submit, the timeline on whether on how long it takes for those permits to be approved, from when they make the applications to when they're actually granted permits to do the cutting, that's a process that's a timeline that I'm having trouble getting answers to from the province.
Could it be this summer or fall?
So it could be. I know once the permits are granted that the company can move quite quickly. On TFLs, one of the reasons we oppose TFLs as opposed to timber supply areas, which are another form of forest tenure on Crown land, is that they give the companies more leeway there. It's more of a rubber stamp process. It's actually the only really benefit of this climate change intensified drought that we're experiencing on the West Coast right now, is that the conditions out in the woods, I was just out in the Walbrand weekend before last, and things are really dry out there. Whether the company can move forward and do so in a safe way, given the risk of wildfire, that's one thing that they'll really be looking at. So again, you know, this dry weather, which is having all kinds of negative impacts.
So what's your plan?
Could hold them off for a little bit.
So they're planning to go ahead. They could start as early as the summer. What do you guys do?
I mean, we want to see this. We're a nonprofit charity. We want to see this resolved before it goes to blockades. It has in the Walbrand before. Gone to blockades. There's been mass arrests there in the early 1990s.
Think there's the possibility?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's legions of people that we're tapped into as a grassroots organization that want nothing more than to make the bridge over the Walbrand River this year's Burnaby Mountain. We don't want to see it go there. We want to see this resolved in a diplomatic way. We want to see it resolved with the province.
It's unfortunate, but we have to say that it's good that people are willing to do that, because they won't stop. The corporations and the government and the media that they own will not stop. They will destroy everything, as we can clearly see. So it's wonderful that there are a lot of people willing to stand up and stop them, which is it's the only thing left.
Right.
But there's got to be a plan. You guys don't.
At the same time,
buy
you know,
it from them.
It might.
What's ours?
It might, blockade tactics might work to hold off logging for now in this area, but there's nothing that would prevent, you know, another campaigner with the Wilderness Committee being back here in 25 years campaigning for the same thing.
I mean,
so the solution is the province coming to the table, talking with the company about areas where they can log elsewhere in their TFL. The province has to demand that companies begin the transition to sustainable second growth logging.
Can they make that demand?
Pardon me?
Can the province make that demand?
Absolutely. The forest industry the forest ministry is there to regulate the forest industry. It's not to roll over and let these companies roll over our forests. It's to step in and say we need to be getting higher value from our forests. We need to be harvesting second growth in a sustainable way. We're not going to get to that future industry by liquidating the very last of the old growth.
Torrance, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Christy Clark, it's up to you. Another, not that you care, but another part of BC is being destroyed. Thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 3 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, June the 23rd in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. Our guest in this segment is Meaghie Champion, and Meaghie is one of the people that's behind an alternate currency. Can I call it that?
Well, there's different ways to think of it. It's an alternative currency, or it's like a barter network.
Okay, and it's
or it's a
called,
mini economy.
and it's called Tetla. So you have right there
Yes, these are Tetla comes in 2 denominations. One
Tetla.
Nutsa Tetla, or a Punis Tetla, which is 10 Tetla.
Okay.
And right now there's about 200 or so people in the Greater Victoria area who have Tetla in their possession. There's about 17,000 Tetlas circulating throughout the Greater Victoria area. There's about 65 businesses that are participating, different things that you can spend your Tetla on. And there have been roughly $70,000 worth of transactions that have taken place over the last 2 to 3 years that we know of. We've actually found, interestingly enough, that there are transactions taking place in the Tetla economy that have nothing to do with us. It's a lady who's gardening and doing house cleaning for Tetla, but we're not the ones hiring her. She's just found someone that's got Tetla, and she's contracted to get the Tetla on her own. So it's sort of
kind of
expanding.
like money.
It is. It's exactly.
money.
It's sort of like money. It's like a super gift certificate. It's like a Canadian Tire money that could be spent at a whole bunch of different stores.
So what's the philosophy, and how did you get started in doing it?
Well, I'm Coast Salish. I'm from Cowichan Tribes.
Okay.
And I, came home about 20 years ago. I was one of the babies from the 60s scoop, so I was removed from my native family and raised in a non-native home. And 20 years ago, I came home and I started to learn about my culture. And I've always been fascinated by economics. And so I was just amazed to find that my people had a very vibrant economy in place before non-native people showed up. We had this banking system, which was called our potlatch, where we invested in one another, and we circulated wealth and took care of one another. We even had words for bank. The word for bank is telout, which is the word. It's the process of we gather money when a family's in trouble, and we support that family with our help.
That's the word for bank?
Telout.
Boy, that sure changed.
So we also had words for different kinds of loans. And so, this myth that Native people had no concept of money or had no concept of finance, or that this is all a white people invention, is false.
One of the things that's happened is that not only, we have never been told, because I've read occasionally that the societies that flourished in North America prior to the coming of the Europeans were great and sometimes very democratic societies and very advanced, not technologically like the Europeans were at the time, and we've lost all that. Whole story has been kept from us, so I have no idea.
Well, we have so much to offer.
Yeah.
The Tetla, rather than incorporate, which would be going to the white government, the non-native government, and saying, "Can I have permission to do this?" I decided, in concert with talking to my elders, that we would form, instead of a corporation or a nonprofit, we would form a Sitsawatl, which is an organization of people working together for common benefit. And the word Sitsawatl means working together, everyone benefits. So that's how we've set up the structure of Tetla, is we don't want people participating in Tetla unless they're actually going to benefit in some way. We've had people show up and say, "Oh, I want to be part of Tetla." I'm like, "Well, go to the website. Is there anything on the website that you are interested in buying with your Tetla?" And they're like, "No." Well, then I can't help you, because we don't want people just to have Tetla for the sake of Tetla. We want them to be using it and benefiting it from in some way. And then the other thing that Tetla's been doing is providing the core funding to do Hulkaminam language classes. We've done 15 of these classes over the last 2.5 years. So we're by using the Tetla economy, we're able to provide the language classes to our community to be a real benefit to First Nations people. So we're not just, it's cool that we've got the First Nations thing attached to what we're doing, but we've also got to be giving back, not just using it to sort of brand ourselves.
Does the Tetla have, can I call it, official support from any of the First Nations?
I spoke to the hereditary leader of the Lekwungen Esquimalt people, Andy Thomas. I told him about it.
Yeah.
It was 2.5 years ago. I told him we were going to be doing it. He didn't have a problem with it. I don't think he paid too much. I don't think he took it seriously.
Yeah.
But he certainly didn't say, "Oh no, you can't do that." He said, "Well, sounds great. Just all the power to you." I also spoke to the hereditary leader of the Samana, the descendant of the last hereditary leader of Samana, which is where I'm from, and I got her permission to practice Tetla Sitsawatl in our area. So those are the people that I recognize as having authority over the system. And if they came to me and said, "Stop what you're doing," or "We want you to do it differently," I would absolutely listen to them and take exactly what they said on board and follow that.
Okay. So how can people join in and help? And because I like the idea, so how do we or you make it grow?
Well, if you have, say you've got a garage, if you want to have like a garage sale,
Okay.
you could sell things for Tetla. If you've got items that you...
Okay, so let's say I do have a garage sale.
Yeah.
What does it mean to sell? Oh, sell things for Tetla. You
Yeah.
mean if people came with Tetla, they
That's
could buy
right.
it?
That's how you could acquire some Tetla, because in order to get into the system, you have to get some Tetla. You've got to have something of
So
value.
how do you get it?
So you would sell your stuff, you'd have Tetla, then you could take your Tetla out into the Tetla economy and you can go to a restaurant. The other thing that Tetla's done is we've had 3 restaurants participate. One of the restaurants, unfortunately, is no longer in business. But for a period of time, there was 3 restaurants that were 100%. You could go in and you could just buy a meal with pay for it in Tetla, except for alcohol. We said, no, you can't use Tetla to buy alcohol. The thing was, we managed to bring about like $4,000 worth of business to that restaurant by have them participate in the Tetla economy. So using Tetla is a way that a restaurant, for example, could bring new business to their restaurant, strengthen their relationship with existing customers without having to go out of pocket for marketing.
Okay.
Or
So how do I get some Tetla?
like I said, if you wanted to, if there's a service that you could
Can I
provide.
buy some Tetla?
No.
You can't buy it.
No.
It's tough to get into the system. Why do you make it
Why
tough
do
to
you
get
make it so
into
hard?
the system?
I really think we've just had the passage of this bill called Bill C-51. And I really think that if I start selling Tetla, somebody somewhere is going to get upset and say I'm doing something that's going to harm the Canadian economy. So just to make it very clear, we're not trying to harm the Canadian economy away. In fact, we think that the Tetla can benefit the Canadian economy.
Yeah.
Because we have brought business. And I know that there have transactions that have taken place that would not have happened if Tetla was not part of the picture.
Okay.
So we've increased the economy by working here in Victoria.
Can you give us the names of some places that are using Tetla now?
There is a wonderful restaurant at 77 Goldstream Avenue in Langford, and it's called Turmeric. And that's 100%. You can go with your Tetla and get wonderful East Indian food. My family and I go there quite frequently, and we love it. There's another place called Sabri Nanwich, and
It's very close to Cedar Hill Recreation Center. I think.
No, that's Cabin 12.
Okay.
That's the business that unfortunately is no longer.
That's too bad.
Yeah. Hemp & Company. Everything I'm wearing here, top to bottom, except for my shoes, is clothing that I paid for with Tetla. 50% that they're accepting at this point. So there's clothing.
My shirt is also from Hemp & Company.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Hemp &
So
Company is just gorgeous clothing.
50% you can buy.
50% you can
Tetla.
use
But I
Tetla.
can't get any Tetla.
Got to have a garage sale, or
don't have a
do some
garage.
consulting, or you know what? If you really wanted to,
How about this?
Get
how
some
about
gift
if
certificates.
How about if I charge you if I charge you for being on the show and the price is
Sure.
10 Tetlas,
Okay,
then I can
sure,
get some Tetlas?
absolutely. The other thing you could do, we've had people do this, is if you know someone that has gift certificates, we will exchange Tetla for gift certificates. We just won't take Canadian money.
What's a gift certificate?
Like a gift certificate, like if you have Canadian Tire money, or a restaurant that has like gift certificates that people.
Oh, you mean if I have like a gift certificate
Like a
from
gift
Mayfair
card.
Mall?
Yeah, if you had a $20 gift card, I'd be happy to exchange that gift card for
Tetlas.
Tetlas. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
but
okay.
not I won't take cash.
Okay. And that's why won't you take cash again?
Why won't I take
You really
cash?
think it's that Bill C-51?
I do. I'm worried.
See, that's what Bill C-51 is doing. It's insidious.
It is.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Were you selling Tetlas for cash
No.
before?
No, I mean, what we did encourage, there are people with an excess of Tetlas, and they were selling them. There was a secondary market. There were people
Oh,
selling
okay.
their Tetlas
But you gotta
for
meet somebody.
cash. In fact, my friend is.
What are some other things I can get for Tetlas? Is there
let's
any
see,
like
house cleaning services?
Okay, that's
you can
good.
get your house cleaned 100%. If you have a restaurant and you want your kitchen cleaned, janitorial work,
Okay.
gardening.
Any tradespeople, electricians,
We have
anything like that?
electrician
Okay.
and carpenter.
Okay. Okay.
And there's more. You just go to www.tetla.org and see where can I spend Tetlas, and there's 65, 70 different businesses and places that you can spend them.
Well, I think it's great.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
The future.
Excellent. What we'd like to do in the future is go around to other communities and show them how to do this. I'd be just thrilled to do that, just to take our success and transplant it to other communities so they can do the same thing.
Well, you know what? I just think there's got to be an easier way to get Tetlas.
I'll work on it. I will absolutely work on it for you, Jack, 100%.
Okay, I'm looking for a gift. Yeah, I have to buy a gift certificate, and then I can come
Then
to you. and
I'll
get
be
some.
happy
Okay.
to exchange. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Meaghie, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me.
And www.tetla.org.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, June the 23rd. Our guest in this segment is Durmod Travis. Durmod is with a group called Integrity BC. And welcome, Durmod. Maybe you can just say a few words about Integrity BC to start.
Sure. This would be the third time I've actually been on with you, Jack. We started in March 2011 in BC as a watchdog, frankly, on the provincial government. And we've since grown somewhat to being not only a watchdog on the BC government, but quite often a watchdog on city halls across BC. We're nonpartisan. We don't tell people how to vote. People may not agree with our opinions at times, but that doesn't make us a partisan organization.
And you do sort of come at things from the position of, I think, democracy.
Well, I think it's very important that there are a lot of systems in place. There's been a lot of recommendations made by groups like the Auditor General, the Information Privacy Commissioner, that we come back to those best practices, because quite often the BC government and city halls like to ignore best practices and prefer to make decisions behind closed doors, even when their own independent officers are telling them to do otherwise.
So we're going to start off talking about what I guess can be called the health firings. And this was the firing by, can we say Christy Clark?
Well, I think we can say it was the firing by the BC government. Now,
Of eight.
eight individuals.
When did this happen now?
Well, it's a complicated issue because they started getting suspended in the summer of 2012, and they were suspended without pay, which is deplorable in and of itself because somebody's obviously reached a conclusion without someone else being given an opportunity to have a fair hearing. Margaret McDermott announced the firings when she was appointed minister on September 6, 2012. And I think it's kind of unfortunate because she's taken the rap for these firings. And the reality is she'd only been Minister of Health for a few hours.
Now that sounds amazing in itself. Well, you sent me some information when I read that Margaret McDermott became Minister of Health, and literally the next day, this remarkable event took place, which was filled with intrigue and dare we say, corruption.
And a tragedy. One of the individuals, as you know, Roderick McIsaac,
So
committed suicide.
was she set up?
I don't think she was set up. I think it's important that everybody remember that the day-to-day activities of government can't stop during a cabinet shuffle. She might have wanted to take a pause and say, I'm ready to announce this, but I want to know more before I go out there to announce it. But really, all of the decisions that led to those firings were made by her predecessor, who is currently the finance minister of BC, Mike de Jong. And I was pleased somewhat to see him today, for the first time, take questions on his role in those firings. And I think the headline that came out of it is that I take some responsibility for it. Well, the problem when you're a minister, under ministerial doctrine according to parliamentary procedure, you don't get to take some responsibility. You have to take it all. And I think he's one of the people that an inquiry has to hear from.
Do you think there's going to be a public inquiry?
I think there should be a public inquiry. I think we know how the BC government reacts.
Okay,
these
now
days.
this is a big problem because who is the group that can call a public inquiry?
Well, there is in BC the Public Inquiry Act. The only party that can call a public inquiry is the government itself.
But the government are the potential evildoers here. Right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, how do we in our society overcome this problem that we give our government tremendous power and then give them the power to oversee themselves? And they are the ones who have to call the public inquiry into their own wrongdoing. It's absolutely undemocratically ridiculous.
Well, I can share some of that sentiment. I can also say, as I've said publicly before, that the government has two choices. One, to call a public inquiry, or to find that all the information comes out anyways, and it's going to be worse for them, quite frankly, if that happens. There are a number of media outlets working on this story constantly. We're working on it whenever we can find time to put into it. We've all been leaked incredible amounts of documents, and I think one of the most notable comments, which was actually phrased as a question, was made last week by Graham Whitmarsh, who was the Deputy Minister of Health at the time of the firings. He himself was later fired after the May 2013 election, but he made a very telling comment to the Vancouver Sun last week when he called for a public inquiry and said, I'm ready to go under oath because I have nothing to hide. Do you? And the question, do you, was to the government. And the government very clearly has something to hide.
Yes, yes. And this is, I mean, this is big. It's a huge issue. So Graham Whitmarsh was the deputy minister. Did he essentially do the firing?
Well, he would have been the individual who would have had to sign off on the terminations. I'm not necessarily certain who conducted the actual phone calls to each individual because most of them were suspended at that point. But I think it's remarkable that they fired 8 people, some of whom have filed wrongful dismissal lawsuits. All but 2 of those lawsuits have been settled by the government out of court. They have all required gag clauses to be signed.
You mean the government required that the people could never speak about what happened or what they got? Yeah.
And so people like myself, the Vancouver Sun, the Tyee and others, we're getting leaks, we're getting bits and pieces.
So what are some of the leaks?
Well, you know, one of the things that I found quite remarkable about this was sitting down one night and saying, if I was in government, who needs to be part of that decision-making process? And I wasn't looking in names, I was looking at titles. And I made my list, and I then put names. And one of the things that's always bothered me about the firings is that a lot of the individuals involved, the MO doesn't fit them. It's not their style in government. One name stood out to me when I saw it, though, was Christy Clark's chief of staff at the time, Ken Buzencool.
Say that name again?
Ken Buzencool.
Ken Buzencool. Cool. Now, he was quite famous himself.
Well, still, quite frankly, is for a lot of people. He is a former advisor to Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada, working with Stephen Harper. He was also, amusingly enough, working on the BC Liberal Party's campaign as part of the work of his private consultancy firm that had a partner who happened to also be working on the NDP campaign at the same time.
So Bosenkool was kind of running the re-election campaign in this past election.
No, he wouldn't have been running, but he was certainly providing advice. Now,
And one of his partners was providing
was
advice.
running the NDP,
The NDP
campaign,
campaign,
Brian Topp. But what's interesting about this is the fact that Christy Clark brought Ken in as her chief of staff in February of 2011. He was let go due to an unfortunate incident, as it was described by the government at the time, at the end of September 2012. He was definitely part of the process that led to the firings. But given the nature of everybody's suspicions related to the firings and the potential involvement of Big Pharma, what makes him stand out even more is that he's been a paid lobbyist for 3 different pharmaceutical firms in his career, going up to 2010, just before he left to come to Christy Clark's employment. And one of the companies that he was a paid lobbyist for was Pfizer Canada. Pfizer Canada is again potentially connected to the firings because some of the individuals who were fired were conducting research at the time on Champix, Pfizer's anti-smoking cessation drug. And that study came to a complete halt when they were fired.
So some of the people who were fired were conducting research into a drug made by Pfizer. Premier Clark's chief of staff was a former lobbyist for Pfizer, and a lot of people think that Pfizer did not want the research made public because it showed that their drug wasn't that good, and this is a huge selling drug, and they didn't want anybody showing that there was a problem with it.
Well, not only is it a hugely selling drug, they're also the defendants in a class action lawsuit in Canada, and I would presume also in the United States, over that drug. They would not obviously want any independent studies coming out, and this would have been an independent study coming out through the Therapeutics Initiative at UBC that might not cast their drug in the best of light while they're facing litigation. And we're talking significant litigation because one of the alleged side effects of Champix is that it encourages suicidal thoughts and has led people to commit suicide, and that's the issue of the class action lawsuit. So that's one of the theories out there. You also have another theory that Novartis, another big pharma company, and both of them, by the way, have donated tens of thousands of dollars to the BC Liberal Party. Some of the researchers who were fired were working on a study related to Alzheimer's and medication for Alzheimer's. Well, Novartis is trying to get a new drug on the market for that very specific condition. The problem with this is that all of these theories are out there, and the government refuses to come clean. And until the government comes clean, citizens can have no faith as to which of those theories is right and which of those theories is wrong. And frankly, if I was the villain in one of those theories, I would rather have the government come clean if I was not, in fact, a villain.
It's almost like the rabbit hole, you know. It is very deep. It is very dangerous. There are some real deep issues there. Some great guilt, possibly. Durmod, thank you very much for this great interview. And folks, everybody has got to keep their eye on this issue and see how it goes. Thank you very much for watching Citizens Forum this week.